Welcome to this explainer. Now, to really set the stage for our journey today, I want you to imagine for a second that you're standing on a desolate mountain peak, surrounded by an endless, biting wind. Well, I am that observant, icy wind. I've been watching, and today I'm bringing you a chilling, mythological story of a truly profound transformation. We're going to explore the intense journey of a figure known as the Watchman, and how he eventually evolved into the sovereign of the frost. It's a dramatic story about the devastating cost of illusion and the brutal, isolating path you sometimes have to take to find true liberation. So let's just dive right into the deep end here. What happens when the sun you worship is merely a projection of your own fear? I absolutely love starting with this because it plunges us straight into the dark, atmospheric world we're exploring today. It forces us to ask some hard questions about false light. What if the source of your warmth, your guidance, the entire belief system you've built your life around is actually just a mirage born from your terror of the dark? For our protagonist, the Watchman, this wasn't some abstract philosophical hypothetical. It was the tragic reality of his daily existence. To understand how he changed, we first have to understand where he began. His original existence took place in what is called the Temple of Borrowed Warmth. Picture this massive, sprawling architecture just absolutely soaked in a pale, washed-out, stagnant yellow light. They called it the Temple of Perpetual Light. And inside, the Watchman served as a god of routine. He was entirely dedicated to this holy smoke of collective morality, basically just going through the motions of a life that was handed to him rather than one he actually created for himself.
Now, it might sound grand, being a god and all, but his home wasn't a paradise. It was a sublime prison. Sure, it was a mountain-sized godhood, but it was defined completely by stagnant dependency. The Watchman was essentially trapped in a gilded cage of his own compliance. He was a caretaker of illusions. That holy smoke he tended to, it was just a collective agreement to ignore reality because the comfort was easier. He was a god, yes, but a god chained to a routine that kept him utterly asleep to what he could truly be.
And this brings us right to the core metaphor of his captivity. The Watchman's entire identity was just a false reflection. He existed in a constant state of borrowed warmth, reflecting an ancient sun that was, in truth, nothing more than a projection of his own fear of the void. And he did all this through the mirror of truth, a mirror that offered only a thin, cold imitation of actual light. The mirror here represents his false identity. As long as he stood in front of it, he was nothing more than a passive surface reflecting a lie, completely mistaking that reflection for his own soul. But then comes the breaking point, the shattering of the false mirror. You can almost hear the visceral, deafening sound of breaking glass echoing across the freezing landscape, right? In that moment, the Watchman makes a radical choice. He trades the stagnant, borrowed comfort of his prison for the jagged, unforgiving mountain ledge outside. As the icy wind that was there, I can tell you that when he broke that mirror, he didn't just break glass. He completely shattered his false identity. He stepped right out of that pale yellow light and into the howling, freezing dark. So, the crucial turning point is what he encounters out there. The brutal logic of ice. He embraces the absolute cold. Out on that jagged ledge, shivering and totally isolated, there is no more holy smoke to hide behind. There's absolutely no borrowed warmth. The ice here represents radical independence. It's unforgiving, it's incredibly sharp, and it demands absolute self-reliance. As he begins this steep descent into the midnight of the void, that freezing mountain landscape strips away every single comfort he ever knew. This brilliantly lays out the path of his harrowing transformation. He starts as the god of routine in the past, transitions into a man without a map out in the void, and finally moves toward his incredible rebirth as the sovereign of the frost. This middle phase out in the void is what's referred to as a spiritual surgery. Out there in the blinding snow and plunging temperatures, his deep-seated need for a divine eye to watch over him or some predetermined higher purpose to guide him, it literally freezes away. And let me tell you, this spiritual surgery is agonizing. First comes the great fatigue, just the sheer crushing exhaustion of leaving behind everything you've ever known. Then comes the incredibly painful process of shedding his former skin, actually letting that god of routine die. Finally, he is left standing utterly alone in the absolute cold. To escape the prison, he had to become a man without a map, because out there in the absolute cold, there are no guides. There's only the stark, freezing reality of your own isolated existence. But then, something incredible happens in that absolute zero. Imagine the visual shifting here, from washed-out colors to deep crimsons and pitch blacks. This is the awakening of the dark fire. Right in the very heart of the frozen silence, surrounded by an endless expanse of ice, a profound realization takes hold of him. He doesn't freeze to death. Instead, the total absence of external warmth sparks something deep inside him. A brand new kind of heat is born directly out of the darkness. Which brings us to the core definition of his new existence: dark freedom. This is a state where being nothing actually becomes your ultimate liberation. Because he is no longer busy reflecting a distant sun, he discovers a self-willed dark fire. And this fire is ignited by nothing but the pulse of his own heartbeat. Think about how insanely powerful that is. It's radical independence, a heat that requires absolutely no external sky, no ancient sun, and definitely no holy smoke to feed it. He is fully generating his own survival. Rising up from the snow, he becomes the sovereign of the frost. And his rise is just meteoric. He completely replaces the desperate, repetitive prayers of his former prison with something he created entirely himself: the Song of the Flame. This anthem of autonomy, this internal strength, is so incredibly potent that it fills the freezing, empty void all around him with a golden abundance. He isn't just surviving the ice anymore. His internal power is actively conquering it. To truly grasp the sheer magnitude of this change, just look at the stark contrast between these two lives. The sublime prison was entirely characterized by stagnant dependency and passive reflection, a life of borrowed warmth built entirely on a false identity. In total contrast, dark freedom is defined by an incendiary, creative power and radical independence. He went from being a mirror, merely bouncing back a fake light, to being the fire itself. He becomes, beautifully, a cloud charged with lightning. I want you to really feel the dynamic energy in that phrase. He is no longer a prisoner chained to the slow, predictable arc of an ancient sun. He is a dynamic, unpredictable, and explosive force of nature now. The freezing void couldn't crush him. It only served to condense his energy until he became an absolute storm unto himself. And so, he becomes the self-made torch. Having awakened this incredible dark fire in the isolation of the peaks, he doesn't just stay up there. He actually abandons his former, passive role as a shepherd of illusions. Instead, he carries his inner fire down from the jagged ledges and right into the valley below. He becomes a self-made torch, illuminating the darkness, not with borrowed light, but with the fierce, self-willed heat of his own transformation. Which leads us to the ultimate takeaway of his liberation: conquering the witness. Why does he burn so brightly now? It's simple, because he finally found his own spirit's permission to shine. He burns from a self-made fire because he utterly defeated the need for an external witness. He no longer needs a divine eye to watch him or some collective morality to validate him. His fire is justified entirely by its own existence, and nothing else. So, as the icy wind that has watched the sovereign of the frost descend triumphantly into the valley, I want to leave you with one final thought. Listen closely to this whispering howl. When the freezing void surrounds you and all your borrowed warmth is stripped away, will you desperately search for another's light to reflect? Or will you shatter the mirror, endure the absolute cold, and ignite your own dark fire? Thank you so much for exploring this magnificent journey with me today. Stay curious and keep seeking your own true light.